Story 1. Intake Drawer 7. The refrigeration alarm went off at 1:12 in the morning, the same thin electronic tone I had heard 3 times already that week. It lasted less than 5 seconds. Just enough to tell me one of the intake bays had drifted above range. Just enough to make me look up from the receiving desk. Drawer 7 was showing occupied again. I remember that clearly because I had logged it empty an hour earlier, and because the transport crew had not yet arrived with the John Doe from Paradise Road. When I opened the drawer, there was a body inside with a paper toe tag already attached. The tag carried a case number from 8 years before I started working there. The time of death matched the minute the alarm began. I worked overnight intake for the Clark County Coroner's Office in Las Vegas, Nevada. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended a little after 6 in the morning if the city cooperated, which it usually did not. In summer, especially during heat waves, nothing ran on a clean schedule. The county stayed hot long after midnight. Pavement held heat. Refrigerated trucks idled outside emergency departments. Apartments without working air conditioning turned into sealed ovens by late afternoon. We saw falls, overdoses, exposure cases, unattended deaths, traffic collisions, and the occasional hotel room that would stay in my nose for 2 days after intake, no matter how much coffee I drank. People imagined the morgue as dramatic. It wasn't. Most of it was fluorescent light, stainless steel, compressor noise, and procedure. The dead arrived in transfer pouches with paperwork clipped to the zipper or tucked in a plastic sleeve. I verified seal integrity, checked the transport origin, compared the decedent's temporary identifier to the field report, confirmed whether they were identified or pending, and assigned storage by availability and examination priority. Every movement had to be entered into the case management system and backed by the physical intake ledger in case the network went down, which happened more often in extreme heat than administration liked to admit. By policy, Drawer 7 in the intake corridor stayed open for overflow, unless a scene hold or unidentified priority case required isolation. It was close to the receiving doors, easy to access, and connected to the temperature monitor that maintenance trusted the least. That was because the sensor on that bank had been replaced twice since I started. The readout still drifted now and then, usually by less than a degree. We all knew it. We logged it, reset it, and moved on. That July, Las Vegas was under the kind of heat advisory that made every surface feel temporary. The city looked bleached during the day and feverish at night. Our overnight intake volume went up almost immediately. We had transport crews stacking arrival estimates on the whiteboard before midnight. Every refrigerated compartment mattered. Every empty space mattered even more. I first noticed the issue with Drawer 7 on a Monday morning turnover. I was finishing my temperature logs and reconciling storage occupancy before day shift came in. The digital board showed Drawer 7 occupied. The physical drawer was empty. No sheet, no pouch, no condensation pattern on the tray. Just clean stainless steel and the smell of cold air. I assumed I had missed a move in the system and corrected it. Day shift lead, a woman named Tessa Bloom, initialed my amended line without much interest. The next night, at about 12:40 in the morning, the refrigeration alarm chirped. Again, less than 5 seconds. When I checked the monitor, 7 showed occupied. I opened it, empty. I checked the intake log. No assignment. I cleared the status. 20 minutes later, a transport van from Sunrise Hospital backed into receiving with an unidentified male, probable heat exposure. The field packet already listed temporary holding as Drawer 7. I thought that was a clerical carryover from the dispatch side. It happened. Not often, but enough that I didn't treat it as anything more than poor coordination. I signed the decedent in, placed him in Drawer 2 because 7 was running warm, and wrote a note for morning staff. By Wednesday, I had stopped assuming it was random. The pattern was precise. At 1:12 in the morning or 1:13 at the latest, the intake bank alarm sounded. Drawer 7 displayed occupied. Within 15 to 20 minutes, a new body arrived from somewhere else in the city. Nothing connected the cases. One was an overdose from a weekly motel. One was a pedestrian struck near Fremont. One was an elderly woman found in her apartment with the air turned off and the windows sealed. But each preliminary transport packet, whether handwritten or printed from field submission, carried a storage notation for Drawer 7 before I had made any assignment at all. That was the part that bothered me professionally. A bad sensor was an annoyance. A repeated occupancy ghost in the storage board was a maintenance problem. But paperwork that anticipated a decision I had not yet made meant the error was crossing systems. Intake status, transport routing, and case packet generation were not supposed to talk to each other until after receipt. The chain of information moved one direction: scene to transport, transport to intake, intake to pathology. If the paperwork was already incorporating a storage assignment before the body reached my doors, then either someone upstream was guessing with absurd consistency, or the error was embedded deeper than a refrigeration panel. I started documenting every occurrence in a notebook I kept in my scrub pocket. Time of alarm, outside temperature from the loading dock display, case source, temporary identifier, storage destination requested by packet, actual destination assigned. In the beginning, I did it to protect myself. When you work around death long enough, you learn that any irregularity eventually becomes somebody's question, and the person on overnight is easiest to blame because most supervisors never see the conditions you're dealing with. The first truly wrong thing happened on Thursday. We received an unidentified woman from North Las Vegas a little after 1:30 in the morning. She had no wallet, no phone, and no obvious trauma. The transport pouch had the correct exterior label. I cut the seal, verified the wristband, and checked the toe tag. The case number matched the packet until the last 2 digits. I looked again. The packet ended in 6-4. The tag ended in 6-1. I thought the tag had been miswritten in the field, which was not ideal but not unheard of. Then I noticed the time of death on the tag. It read 1:12 in the morning. The field pronouncement in the transport sheet read 12:47 a.m. I checked the name block even though she was unidentified. It was blank except for 3 typed words in all caps. Reassigned from 7. I stood there for a while longer than I should have, holding the foot out from the pouch and staring at the tag. It looked official. County stock. Correct paperweight. Correct perforation. Same thermal print the office used. Nothing about it felt theatrical or fake. It felt routine, which made it worse. I brought it to Tessa on turnover. She barely glanced at it before saying the field unit sometimes recycled old strips when the printers jammed. I told her the phrase on the bottom was not standard. She said maybe pathology had added an internal note. I told her pathology didn't even touch intake tags. She looked at me over her glasses in the way supervisors do when they want fatigue to be the explanation because fatigue is cheaper than investigation. She asked if I was sleeping. I said I worked nights in a heat emergency. Nobody was sleeping. That afternoon, I woke up around 3:30, made coffee, and called maintenance. They confirmed they had no recorded temperature excursions on Bank B, which included Drawer 7. That contradicted the audible alarm I had heard now for 4 nights. I called records. Records confirmed no active case numbers ending with 6-1 in the unidentified series from that week. Then I called dispatch, and dispatch told me something I wrote down immediately because I knew I would doubt it later. The transport packets were printing from the receiving template with Drawer 7 auto-filled in the storage location field for every after-midnight recovery routed to our office, even though that field should have remained blank until intake entry. I came in early that night. I reviewed the previous shift logs. 7 was empty at 6:22 in the morning. Empty again at 1:10 in the afternoon. Empty at 9:46 that evening on pre-shift check. I initialed the board myself. At 1:12 in the morning, the alarm sounded. Occupied. This time I did not open the drawer right away. I went first to the receiving corridor camera monitor. We had 4 angles on intake: receiving doors, gurney wash area, cold storage corridor, and the short hall leading toward autopsy. Camera D7 covered the corridor bank, including drawer 7 if the rolling rack was not in the way. The live feed showed the corridor empty. All doors closed. No staff present except me at the desk. Then on the monitor, a gurney wheel rolled into frame from the autopsy hall side. No one was pushing it. It moved slowly. Not fast. Like something yanked. Not floating. Just the soundless, deliberate progression of a loaded transport gurney guided by hands that were not there. It crossed the edge of the frame, stopped in front of 7, and remained still for about 6 seconds. Then the footage glitched into compression blocks, stabilized, and showed an empty hall again. I went to the corridor. No gurney, no one in autopsy, no one in wash. I opened drawer 7. A body pouch was inside. I know how that sounds, so I will be exact. There had not been a pouch in that drawer 3 minutes earlier when I checked the full corridor during rounds. Now there was a black transfer pouch zipped fully closed, a county evidence seal threaded through the pull tabs and a toe tag protruding from the lower end. The seal number belonged to a case logged in our archive from 2016. I called security first because if somebody was in the building moving remains as a prank or worse, that was a security incident before it was anything else. The guard on duty was an older man named Rick Astor. He walked the corridor with me, checked the receiving doors, checked the dock, and confirmed nothing was compromised. He also confirmed that the corridor camera recording between 1:12 and 1:14 showed motion distortion but no person present. He used the phrase system artifact. I used the phrase impossible. Neither of us convinced the other. We cut the seal together. Inside was an adult male, moderate decomposition, no field paperwork, no transport sheet, no exterior identification beyond the tag. The tag listed a case number from 8 years earlier, a time of death of 1:12 a.m. and storage assignment intake 7. Under remarks it said hold until claimed. Rick wanted to call a supervisor. I agreed. Night supervisor did not answer. Assistant chief investigator answered on the 3rd attempt and told us to secure the remains, start an irregular event report, and wait until morning for administrative review. Morning review never went where it should have. By 7:30, the body in 7 had no corresponding record in the case system. The irregular event report I had started was visible only as a blank draft, and the archived case number on the toe tag now belonged to an unrelated drowning from Laughlin. Rick swore the tag had been different when he saw it. I swore the same. Administration told us chain of custody could not be established, which was true, and instructed pathology not to examine until identification was resolved. By 10 a.m., drawer 7 was empty. Not reassigned, not transferred. Empty. I stopped trusting the electronic system after that. I relied on paper, on my notebook, on photographs taken with my own phone, even though that violated policy and I knew it. I photographed tags, seals, monitor screens, and the corridor clock every time the alarm sounded. I emailed copies to a private account because I had started worrying that whatever was happening was not just a storage error. It was a correction mechanism. Something inside the building wanted the records to agree with the drawer, and the drawer did not accept being empty. The notebooks turned up the pattern that finally pushed me past professional denial. Everybody associated with 7 had some gap in identity. Unidentified decedent, delayed notification, conflicting hospital paperwork, missing wristband, lost property inventory, family dispute, miscalled birth date, cases hanging between names. The drawer never filled with clean, well-documented transfers. It took the uncertain ones. I asked one of the senior investigators, Jonah Vale, whether the office had ever used intake storage for temporary segregation of unidentified remains before the remodel. He said yes, years ago before my time, when the old county database was being converted. There had been problems with duplicate entries and unmatched decedent numbers after a software migration. A few cases had to be manually reconciled. I asked how. He gave me a look I still remember because it was half embarrassed and half afraid. By picking the version that stayed in the system, he said. I thought he meant bureaucracy. I thought he meant sloppy administration in the way government offices sometimes admit sloppiness with a shrug. Then he added that drawer 7 used to connect to a short-lived overflow corridor that had been sealed during renovation after a refrigeration failure. The space behind that wall no longer existed on current floor plans, but some of the old routing templates still referenced it. He laughed once after saying that too quickly, and told me not to go chasing ghosts in a county building held together by grant money and patch panels. That night, just before 1:12, I pulled the old facility blueprints from record storage. Bank B sat exactly where the plan said it did, but 7 was drawn a little deeper than the others. Behind it, shaded in pencil and later crossed out in red, was a narrow holding corridor labeled Temporary Intake Reconciliation. I had never heard those words before. At 1:12 in the morning, the alarm sounded again. This time, when drawer 7 showed occupied, I opened it immediately and climbed partway in with a flashlight. The compartment should have ended after a few feet. Instead, the back panel was gone. Cold air moved past my face from a deeper space. Stainless steel runners continued into darkness, not into a drawer cavity, but into a corridor barely wide enough for a gurney. I heard wheels ahead of me. What I saw next did not happen quickly, which is why I cannot write it off as panic. There were gurneys lined nose to tail in the dark, each holding a zipped pouch with a paper tag tied to the outer handle. The tags shifted in the moving cold air. Some were new, some were yellowed and curled. I moved the flashlight along the row and saw the same case numbers repeat with small differences. Same surname, different spelling. Same age, different birth year. Same temporary identifier assigned in separate summers years apart. A whole corridor of near matches, as if every uncertain death the city had failed to name cleanly had been stored there until the paperwork stabilized. At the far end stood another gurney with no pouch on it, only a clipboard. The clipboard held my intake sheet from that night. My handwriting was on it. So was a storage assignment I had not written. Transferred to 7 for reconciliation. Under staff initials were mine again, followed by a second line time-stamped 1:12 a.m. tomorrow. I backed out so fast I hit the tray rails with both shoulders. The drawer shut on my arm hard enough to bruise. When I looked up, the corridor was normal again. Stainless steel end panel, empty drawer, no opening, no hidden passage. But on the tray floor there was frost around the shape of gurney wheels. I finished the shift because that is what training does to you. It makes you complete the log even when your hands are shaking. At 5:48 in the morning, a transport arrived from a desert encampment cleanup on the east side. Unidentified male, no wallet, no fixed address. Intake packet pre-filled with drawer 7. I placed him in drawer 3 and signed the exception. When day shift relieved me, 7 showed empty on both the board and my handwritten occupancy map. Before leaving, I checked the morning intake summary. One entry had been added after print time. No timestamp, no source location. Storage destination 7, staff initials mine. I do not know whether the building was creating records to match its own omissions or preserving people the county failed to process cleanly the first time. I only know that drawer 7 never stayed empty, not in the systems that mattered to it. A week after I transferred to another department, Tessa called me and asked if I had taken one of the old notebooks home by mistake. She said they were missing a reconciliation log from summer intake. I told her I had not. Then she asked a strange question in a very careful voice. She asked if I had ever worked the overnight on August 9th, 2016. I told her no. I had not even been employed there yet. She said that was what she thought too. Then she hung up. I still keep the private photographs, though most of them have degraded into gray blocks and smears whenever I try to enlarge them. The only image that remains clear is the monitor board from 1:12 in the morning on my final week. Drawer 7 is highlighted in amber. Status occupied. Under remarks, there is a line I never noticed until months later, awaiting next intake. After that summer, I stopped believing that institutions lose people by accident. Sometimes the loss looks organized. Sometimes it arrives refrigerated, logged, and ready for signature. And once you hear a system correcting itself in the middle of the night, every alarm after that sounds less like a warning and more like a voice clearing its throat. Story 2. The Unclaimed Voice. By the time the roads out of Reno closed, I had already been in the pathology lab for almost 14 hours. It was late January of 2014, and the storm had turned everything outside the teaching hospital into a white blur under sodium light. Snow struck the loading dock doors hard enough to sound like handfuls of gravel. Staffing thinned by the hour. Residents who lived across town were sleeping in call rooms. Couriers were delayed. One of the histology techs rolled blankets into a chair by the break room because she knew she was not getting home before morning. I was the attending forensic pathologist on an ugly double shift that had started with routine hospital deaths and slipped by late afternoon into coroner consults because weather had trapped half the county in place. The regional hospital handled more than it should have during storms. If highway transport stalled or mountain roads closed, everything backed into us. Examinations had to continue whether the weather respected schedules or not. People think autopsy work feels dramatic. Mostly it feels procedural. You verify identity, review scene reports, note body condition, document clothing and property transfer, dictate external findings, and proceed according to jurisdiction and cause of death questions. It requires precision more than nerve. My comfort came from sequence. Label the specimen containers, confirm accession number. Photograph before incision, log every retained item. Dictate observations before memory begins compressing them into summary. The dead do not complain, but the record does. If you leave a gap in documentation, it stays with you. That winter, we were using a hybrid dictation system that never worked as smoothly as administration promised. We had handheld voice recorders for immediate note capture and a lab workstation with speech recognition software that converted formal dictation into draft reports. The software had a habit of learning bad habits. If you repeated a phrase often enough, it would begin inserting it before you spoke, as if it could anticipate your report structure. I hated that. I still dictated carefully in complete sentences because pathology is one of the few fields where a lazy adjective can become a legal problem. The first time I heard the other voice, I assumed one of the residents had left an old file open. It was close to 11 p.m. I had just completed the external exam on a middle-aged man recovered from a motel room off Interstate 80. Possible overdose, no obvious trauma. Mild lividity posterior. Needle marks old, not acute. Standard case. I pressed playback on my recorder to confirm a tissue note because the room ventilation had rattled during my first pass. I heard my own voice for a few seconds. Then another voice, male, low, calm and professionally flat in the way experienced pathologists sound when they have dictated too many reports to ornament their language. He said, "The gastric contents contain partially digested tablets, pale blue, approximately 6 in number. Note pulmonary edema on opening the thoracic cavity. I had not opened the body yet. I checked the recorder screen to make sure I had not loaded the wrong file. The case number was correct. My spoken header was correct. Then the file continued in my own voice as if nothing had happened. I said nothing to anyone. Labs are full of stray sound. People dictate over old recordings. Portable recorders get reused. Snow pushes static into every system that depends on stable power. I set it aside and continued. At 12:15 in the morning, I performed the internal examination. There were 6 pale blue tablets in the stomach. There was pulmonary edema. That got my attention. You can explain away one correct guess if the circumstances fit. Overdose cases produce familiar findings. But the specificity bothered me, especially because the voice had spoken before the body cavity was opened. I replayed the file twice more. Same result. My voice, then the other one, then mine again. I told myself it had to be contamination from another file, maybe one discussed nearby at sign-out. Still, I pulled the digital archive and checked whether the recorder had somehow synced from a prior case. Nothing obvious. No file corruption alert, no duplicate audio block. Only a standard waveform with one section where the system labeled the speaker as unknown user. I was irritated more than frightened. Irritation is often the first form fear takes in professional settings because anger feels more useful. I went to the workstation in the report room, uploaded the audio, and dictated the case into the speech recognition software. When I saved the draft, it inserted a sentence I had not spoken. Internal findings consistent with previous winter admission pattern. I deleted it. I saved again. The sentence returned along with a second line. Recommend comparison to archived case series. I stared at the screen long enough for the monitor to dim. Then I printed the draft rather than trusting the system and put the paper in my coat pocket. Shortly after 1 in the morning, one of the residents, Grant Leland, came into the suite carrying coffee and looking half frozen. He asked if I needed help finishing the backlog. I asked him whether he had ever heard stray voices in the dictation software. He laughed in the immediate way people do when they think the answer is an easy no, then stopped laughing when he saw my face. He said the software sometimes imported old macros from retired attendings. Templates, phrases, standard descriptive blocks. Nothing vocal, nothing in playback. He asked if I wanted engineering called. I told him not yet. That turned out to be a mistake. The second case was an elderly woman from assisted living, pending toxicology because medication reconciliation from the facility was incomplete. I dictated the external exam in room 2. When I played back the recorder, the male voice was clearer. Open the scalp before you remove the eyes, he said. You will not find what the chart says you should. Again, calm, almost instructional, not threatening, not emotional, just certain. I did not follow the suggestion immediately because that is not how examinations are conducted. You do not let a voice in a recorder alter procedure. But once the internal work began, I found a subdural hemorrhage not noted in the chart review and a medication profile that did not match the nursing list sent with the body. I felt then what I can only call a professional draft of cold air moving through me. Not panic, a change in pressure. By 2 in the morning, the storm had worsened. The hospital announced restricted movement between buildings because visibility had dropped. The pathology wing, which already felt separate from the rest of the hospital on ordinary nights, took on that isolated quality large institutions get when fewer people are awake to animate them. Ventilation sounded louder. Hallway floors reflected the light too cleanly. The intercom remained silent for long stretches, which made every overhead announcement seem intrusive when it finally broke through. I started checking the reports I had already saved into the archive. 3 had changed, not dramatically. That would have almost been easier. Instead, the changes were subtle, like the system had decided to tune the wording without asking me. Mild bilateral edema became familiar bilateral edema. Toxicology pending became pattern pending confirmation. One report ended with an attending attestation that was not mine and not current. Dr. Elias Wren. I knew the name, but only faintly. Wren had been a forensic pathologist in Reno years before I arrived. He had taught at the hospital, consulted on county cases, and died before I joined the department. I had seen his name in old lecture materials stored on a shared drive nobody cleaned up. I could not have said much else about him before that night. I printed the altered reports. I disconnected the workstation from the network. I told Grant to stop using voice dictation and switch to handwritten notes until morning. He asked why. I said the archive was behaving strangely in the storm, which was true and insufficient. The third recording came from a case I had not even started. A transport from a small town west of the city had been delayed by weather and arrived just after 2:30. The body remained sealed in the refrigerated receiving area while I completed my notes. The recorder, which was sitting on the metal desk near the microscope room, activated on its own. I know it activated because I heard the start tone. When I picked it up, the red light was on. The voice said, "Case series continues. Observe the marrow color, preserve vitreous. Do not trust the admission medication list. It has already been corrected once." Then, after a pause, it said my name. Not doctor, not pathologist. Just my name, in the exact cadence of a colleague trying not to startle me in a quiet room. I turned the recorder off so hard the battery cover popped loose. Grant came in from the hall and asked what happened. I told him the recorder malfunctioned. He asked why I looked pale. I said because I was very tired, which had the advantage of sounding believable. What followed is the part I still review in procedural terms because the alternative is to admit I may have crossed into superstition while wearing a lab coat. I went to archive storage and pulled old winter cases involving unexplained toxicology discrepancies. I did not choose Dr. Wren's name first. His appeared because the phrase from the report, "Case series continues," matched wording in a memorandum from the late 1990s regarding a cluster of unexplained deaths during a severe storm season. Same region, same weather isolation. Same note about inconsistent medication lists between hospital records and post-mortem findings. The attending pathologist on all 4 cases was Elias Wren. The dictated reports attached to those cases carried errors I had seen the speech software make that very night. Not content errors, dictation errors, specific substitutions. The word familiar used where mild belonged. The phrase pattern pending confirmation. A tendency to say observe instead of note before internal findings. It was like recognizing a person by handwriting before seeing their face. I found an old staff note buried in the back of one file. Wren had remained in the lab during a blizzard after home travel became impossible. He was on an extended call period, sleep-deprived, dictating into an early digital system connected to a server migration the hospital later replaced. According to the memo, his preliminary reports on several deaths contained details not confirmed until later examination. At the time, the discrepancy was explained as verbal missequencing during dictation. The note ended there, but there was no follow-up, no correction memorandum, no final review signed by quality assurance. I looked for his death certificate. There wasn't one in the archive. Instead, there was an internal personnel note indicating Dr. Wren was declared missing after failing to return from an overnight during storm closure. No witness, no departure log, no body recovered. Office reassigned 2 months later. I took those files to the workstation room and found Grant sitting rigid in my chair, staring at the report screen. He asked whether I had logged into an old teaching module as a joke. I said no. He turned the monitor toward me. The report draft for the sealed third case was already open. The internal exam section was complete. Complete. It described petechiae I had not yet documented, marrow findings I had not observed, and a toxicology recommendation cross-referenced to the same cluster from Wren's winter files. The attending name at the bottom cycled between mine and his every few seconds, as if the software could not settle which of us was responsible for the case. Grant wanted to call information technology. I told him to do it. He left. I printed everything. When he came back 10 minutes later, he said the help desk line was routing to an empty voicemail because the administration building had lost power. That was when the overhead lights dipped. Backup lighting came on a half-second later, dimmer and more yellow than the usual fluorescent wash. The whole lab changed character. Stainless steel looked almost gray. The rooms beyond the autopsy suite seemed deeper. Somewhere inside the ventilation run, a loose panel began tapping with the mechanical regularity of a metronome. My recorder, which was still on the desk with the battery cover hanging loose, powered on again. I did not touch it. The voice said, "You think the reports are changing. They are not. They are returning." I remember every word after that because I repeated them to myself for months. They corrected my phrasing. They corrected my sequence. Then they corrected my absence. The archive cannot keep an unresolved death in the reporting chain. It fills the vacancy with the next voice that fits. Grant heard that part too. I know he did because his face lost all color. He asked who was speaking. The recorder answered before I could. "You will sign the pending cases before dawn." The battery icon on the screen showed empty. I took the recorder into Autopsy Room 1 and placed it on the stainless table beside the sealed third case. Then I cut the pouch open because at that point professional protocol and private dread had become inseparable. If the voice knew the findings, I wanted to force the sequence on my own terms. The body was an adult male, mid-50s, snow exposure possible, no obvious trauma. I opened according to standard technique. Several internal findings matched the dictated report exactly. Not surprising anymore, only dreadful. Then I removed the liver sample container from the tray setup and noticed something impossible. It was already labeled in my handwriting. Correct accession. Correct case number. Tissue source written exactly as I would have written it. Time collected listed as 3:18 a.m. It was 3:10. Not predicted, not guessed. Already documented as completed. Grant backed toward the door and said we needed security. I told him to go. He did not move. We both stood there while the recorder spoke one last time. Check the staff archive. After that, the file ended in static. I left Grant with the case and went to personnel records in the admin hallway. Because by then reason had narrowed into a single ugly question. If the system needed to resolve an absence in the reporting chain, what happened to the people who occupied that gap? Staff archive held decades of badge photos, credentialing documents, and old rosters no one had digitized properly. Dr. Wren's folder was thin. Mine was too, which made sense because I had been there only 3 years. But tucked into the back of Wren's folder was a photocopy of a departmental call schedule from the storm week of his disappearance. His name was crossed out in pen after the 3rd day. Written beneath it in a hand I recognized with sick certainty as my own was coverage assignment. I had never seen the schedule before in my life. The same handwriting appeared on a quality assurance memo 2 folders later. It documented completion of delayed reports from Wren's storm cases. Signed by me, dated 9 years before I joined the hospital. The rational part of my mind attempted explanations with admirable speed. Misfiled copy, similar handwriting, archive contamination, administrative absurdity. But all those explanations broke on the same fact. My personnel badge photo was clipped to the later memo, not because it belonged there, but because the hospital copier had captured it as part of a double-sided credential card. I left the folder open on the desk and went back to the lab. Grant was gone. Not in the room. Not in histology. Not in the hall. His coffee was still on the counter, half full and steaming faintly. The third case lay open under the lights. The recorder was silent. On the workstation screen, the final report was waiting for signature. Attending pathologist listed Dr. Lydia Wren. My first name. His surname. The case archive behind it showed more reports repopulating from midnight onward, each one moving older, unresolved language into current files, as if the entire system had been waiting for the weather to isolate the building long enough to resume a process interrupted years earlier. I did not sign. That matters to me even now. I printed the drafts, shut the workstation down by the power supply, locked the specimen refrigerator, and sat in the report room until dawn with paper copies in my lap and the recorder wrapped in 2 biohazard bags. When day staff finally fought their way in through the snow, everything had changed back just enough to make me sound unstable. The archive showed only minor formatting errors. The recorder battery was dead and its files incomplete. Grant had gone to the resident sleep room around 4, according to his own shaky account, and remembered little after the lights dipped. But there were things that did not return to normal. The printed drafts remained altered. The old personnel memo remained clipped wrong. And the sealed sample container labeled in my handwriting before collection remained on the evidence tray until noon, when it vanished during handoff without a traceable discard record. I transferred out of hospital pathology within the year. Officially, I cited burnout and teaching pressure. Unofficially, I no longer trusted any reporting system that learned my voice. There are still nights in winter when I wake certain I have heard a recorder start somewhere in the house. And once each January, usually during the first real storm, the hospital archive sends an automated reminder to an email address I never bothered to close. Pending cases require final attestation. The sender field changes each time. The wording does not. If institutions like morgues preserve what slips through names, then archives preserve what slips through time. And a voice does not have to belong to the dead to become unclaimed. It only has to remain where the next person will speak. Story 3. Coroner's Transit Log. In the State Transport Service, the paperwork mattered almost as much as the body. That was something my supervisor told me on my first week, and I understood what he meant long before the route outside Ely began showing up in my manifest. Bodies moved between facilities all the time across Nevada. Small county offices lacked refrigeration space. Some towns had no on-site pathologist, and distances between jurisdictions meant a decedent could spend half the night in transit before ever reaching a proper examination suite. My job was not dramatic. I drove, verified seal integrity, logged custody transfer, confirmed mileage, and kept the remains stable from pickup to destination. People hear medical transport driver and picture an ambulance with lights. We did not run like that. State Forensic Transport was a white box van with reinforced refrigeration, a cot lock, 2 backup coolers for evidence-sensitive transfers, and a binder thick enough to stop a door from closing. Graveyard rotation was mostly desert highway, dispatch radio, coffee that tasted faintly of the thermos gasket, and long stretches of nothing that felt bigger at 3 in the morning than they ever did in daylight. That autumn, 2025, I was based out of a support yard outside Ely, Nevada, covering rural pickups through White Pine and neighboring counties when local funeral contractors were unavailable. Nights were dry and cold by late October. Wind moved through the sage in a way you could hear even from inside the cab if you shut the engine off. The distances got into your head. Town lights would appear, vanish behind a ridge, and then appear again miles later, as if the whole state were shifting its landmarks when you were not looking directly at them. I had been doing transport work for 9 years and had a reputation for being exact. I logged odometer start and finish before every route. I wrote seal numbers twice, once in the digital tablet and once in paper backup. If a pickup site was missing coordinates, I called dispatch before rolling. If a sheriff's deputy tried to hand me a body without proper release signature, I waited until the paperwork caught up. That kind of stubbornness is unpopular in some jobs. In ours, it keeps things from turning into legal problems. The first strange run came in under routine language. Unknown adult male, rural recovery, transfer from temporary county holding to state forensic facility. Pickup location listed as Mercer Crossing, 13 miles southeast of a place called Black Wren. I had been running those counties long enough to know Black Wren was not an active town. It was an abandoned mining settlement on old survey maps and local history displays, not a current dispatch point. Mercer Crossing meant nothing to me at all. I radioed dispatch at a little after 11 p.m. and asked whether the location was correct. The dispatcher, a woman named Nina Holt, read it back without hesitation and gave me a route marker off an unnumbered county road that branched from the highway south of Ely. Her voice was normal. No confusion, no joke in it. I asked if she could send map confirmation to the tablet. She said she already had. The tablet displayed a route. I followed it. It took me off the main highway and down a paved county stretch I knew well, then onto a narrower road with no reflective center line and no visible county sign. That was unusual but not impossible in the rural grid. What was unusual was the mileage. My odometer showed 14 miles from the turnoff when the tablet claimed I had traveled 26. Then 3 minutes later, the tablet corrected itself to match the odometer. I noted it in the paper log and kept driving. Mercer Crossing turned out to be a boarded gas station, a collapsed shed, and one functioning sodium yard light beside a prefab county cooler unit set on a concrete pad. A deputy I did not know met me there, badge clipped to a jacket, clipboard in hand, breath visible in the cold. He had me sign the release, help me load the pouch, and said the body had been recovered from a dry wash nearby after 2 hikers found it at dusk. Normal enough. The decedent's tag listed male, unidentified, approximate age 50, clothing description, and temporary county number. I verified the seal, noted lividity visible through the pouch windowing, and rolled out. Estimated arrival at the Ely support yard, 40 minutes. I reached the yard in a little over an hour and turned over the transfer to refrigeration. The night intake clerk took one look at the tag and frowned. He said we had already received that decedent 2 weeks earlier from the same county. I asked him to check again. He did. Same temporary number, same clothing description, same recovery location. The only difference was the date. I assumed duplicate numbering on the county side. Rural offices recycled forms sometimes. Still, duplicate temporary identifiers across separate recoveries were serious enough that I called dispatch before finishing my post-run inspection. Nina told me there was no open location in the system called Mercer Crossing. None had been transmitted to my tablet. According to her screen, I had accepted a pickup from County Road 19, mile marker 12, South Fork Wash Recovery, which was a real place but not where I had been. I told her the tablet route said otherwise. She said the route history showed a straight line there and back with no stop at any town or station. That was the first night I started keeping my own second log, separate from the official packet. I wrote the landmarks as I remembered them. Burned billboard skeleton, white cattle gate, dry station with 1 lamp, deputy with a stitched name strip that said Ferris. I also wrote down something I had not noticed until I was already halfway home. I could not remember the deputy's face, not blurred, not obscured by darkness, just absent, as if the memory had been recorded before his features finished loading. The next week brought 3 more after-midnight transports, all touching the same stretch south of Ely. One pickup was from a county clinic cooler with a released estate for post-mortem imaging. One was a coroner request from a sheriff's substation near a shut-down mine access road. One was another unidentified recovery routed through Black Wren, which again did not exist on Nina's day map when I called to confirm. Every route behaved the same way. Daylight preparation showed ordinary roads. After midnight, the tablet produced an alternate line across the desert. GPS breadcrumbing dropped random gaps of 6, 11, sometimes 19 minutes with no signal loss warning. Mileage came back inconsistent between vehicle odometer, dispatch estimate, and fuel usage. And on 2 of the 4 cases, intake at the receiving facility told me the decedents had already arrived weeks earlier. I started pulling old manifests during downtime. The chain of custody system let drivers review only completed transfers linked to our credentials, which meant if the names or temporary numbers repeated, I could cross-check the runs. That was when I found the signatures. Multiple manifests on dates I had not worked carried my signature in the release line. Not something resembling it, mine, the way I looped the B in Brent, the flattened tail on the H. Same pen pressure pattern, same quick slash through the final stroke. The dates ranged back 3 months. Pickup locations included Mercer Crossing, Black Wren Receiving, and one entry that simply said South Route Hold. I took printouts to my supervisor, Dale Carr. He listened with the patient expression administrators use when they are deciding whether to treat you as a problem or a person. He said signatures could migrate during digital form conversion. I told him the paper backups matched. He said fatigue on graveyard can distort recall. I told him my off days were on the schedule. He said dispatch probably used placeholder location names for rural coordinates because the tablet system was old. When I showed him a manifest for a night I had been in Carson City at my daughter's college orientation, his expression changed. Only slightly, but enough for me to see it. He asked to keep the copies. I refused and handed him duplicates instead. After that meeting, dispatch began sounding strange, not eerie, formal. Whenever Nina or one of the other overnight dispatchers read a run involving the South Route, they used the same phrasing word for word. Proceed to assigned recovery point. Maintain chain of custody. If route repeats, continue until transfer is acknowledged. The first time I heard the line, I thought it was a standard reminder from a macro. By the 4th time, I knew it was only used on that road. In November, a windstorm rolled down from the mountains and pushed grit across the highway hard enough to hiss against the van. I was assigned a pickup from an abandoned church parking lot outside a place called Dunlow Basin, which at least existed on county maps. The run was delayed by a vehicle rollover farther north, and I did not reach the turnoff until 1:20 in the morning. When the tablet updated, the route shifted away from Dunlow and back onto the now familiar dark county road leading toward Black Wren. I should have refused. Instead, I radioed in, got confirmation from dispatch, and drove. The gas station lamp was there again at Mercer Crossing. The prefab cooler unit hummed softly in the wind. This time there was no deputy, only a release packet clipped to the door handle and a body already on a gurney beside the loading pad. That violated every transfer rule we had. I called dispatch 3 times, no answer, only open static. I checked the packet. County temporary number. Unidentified male. Estimated age 48. Personal effects none. Transport destination state forensic intake. Under releasing officer signature was my name, not a copied signature, written in wet-looking blue ink as if I had just completed it. My palms went cold on the packet. I checked the timestamp on the top sheet. 1:12 a.m. same night. 12 minutes before I had arrived. I did not load the body immediately. I walked the whole site with my flashlight first. The boarded station office was empty. No vehicle tracks but mine. No active radio traffic. No sound except the cooler unit and the wind pushing sheet metal somewhere behind the shed. When I came back to the gurney, the pouch zipper had been opened about 6 inches at the head. I had not touched it. There are rules about opening pouches in the field. Transport drivers do not perform scene verification beyond identity markers unless seal integrity is compromised and law enforcement authorizes inspection. This seal was intact. Still, the zipper gap was there, and I knew with absolute certainty it had not been when I circled the building. I should have zipped it shut and walked away. Instead, I pulled the opening back far enough to see the face. It was not my face. That would be too neat, too theatrical. What I saw was worse. It was the unidentified male from the first Mercer Crossing run in October. Same weathered skin, same gray stubble, same split in the lower lip. A decedent I had already delivered to the Ely yard weeks earlier and watched refrigeration staff take inside. I closed the zipper, loaded the gurney, and drove. The return route did not behave like a return route. Landmarks repeated out of order. I passed the same cattle gate twice within 10 minutes. My odometer climbed normally, but the dashboard clock lost 23 minutes without warning. The tablet breadcrumb line showed a perfect loop, then a straight segment through empty map space where no road existed, then another loop. When I finally hit the main highway, the radio came back alive with Nina asking if I was still en route to pickup. Still en route. I told her I was 40 minutes past pickup and inbound with the decedent. She said dispatch showed I had never left the state yard. I drove straight to the receiving dock at Ely and made intake witness the seal and paperwork before I let myself think. The night clerk on duty that time was a younger guy named Milo. He scanned the temporary number and went pale. He said the body associated with that number was already in cold storage and had been awaiting transfer to Reno for 10 days. We checked. Drawer lane 3 held an identical pouch with the same temporary tag. I do not know what I expected when Milo unzipped it. Relief, maybe, if the body looked different. Instead, it was the same man again, down to the split lip. One body was colder than the other. That was the only difference. Administration responded the next morning with the usual language. Documentation anomaly. Facility duplication. Temporary lock on South Route manifests. Dale instructed me not to discuss the matter with outside agencies until records reconciliation was complete. I asked him whether anyone had ever physically gone to Mercer Crossing in daylight. He said there was nothing there but scrub and concrete footings from a service station abandoned decades earlier. No cooler unit, no county pad, no sodium lamp. I went anyway on my off day. In daylight, he was right. No lamp, no cooler, only broken pad edges and rusted pump anchors. But there were tire tracks in the dust matching the van's tread pattern, looping in circles around the lot before rejoining the road. Mine. I followed them to the back of the station ruins where wind had exposed a half-buried road sign face down in the sand. When I turned it over, the lettering had mostly flaked away, but enough remained to read the old town name. Black Wren Receiving, not station, not crossing, receiving. That wording kept working at me. Receiving was what we called intake, not a town service, a process word, not a place word. I spent the next 2 nights comparing my private notes to archived manifests. The pattern finally showed itself in a way I could not ignore. Every South Route decedent had 2 origin points, one on the official map, one on the night route, and every one of them, without exception, had a prior arrival logged before the run that supposedly brought them in. The transport was not moving bodies from scene to facility, it was moving them between versions of arrival, as though the road itself existed to reconcile whichever chain of custody had gone unresolved the first time. The last run assigned to me came on a Sunday just after midnight. Dispatch voice, standard phrasing, pick up South Route hold. I told Dale I would not take it. He said if I wanted to keep my credentials, I would complete the route and let administration sort out the software after. That was the closest he came to admitting he already knew more than he was saying. I drove because there are practical kinds of fear that beat irrational ones. Mortgage fear, employment fear, the fear of being the only person in a system who refuses to sign. The route to Mercer Crossing opened up on the tablet before I reached the turnoff as if it had been waiting for me. The gas station lamp burned steady in the dark. The cooler unit door stood open. Inside were 3 gurneys. On each lay a body pouch with a county tag tied to the handle. All 3 tags bore dates from different weeks. All 3 releasing signatures were mine. Behind the gurneys hung a clipboard board with route sheets clipped in neat rows. I stepped close enough to read the top one. Driver assigned Brent Halpern. Departure time 1:12 a.m. Destination Clark County Coroner, Las Vegas. Status pending retrieval. There was no Las Vegas run on my schedule. There never had been. Yet the form beneath it had a later date, then another. Each one signed, each one looped back to South Route hold after transfer. On the last sheet under remarks, someone had written a note in my own hand. If route repeats, continue until transfer is acknowledged. I heard the van engine outside even though I had shut it off. Heard the rear doors open, heard the cot wheels lock into place. For 1 second I understood the whole thing with the dull clarity of procedural truth. The route was not trapping me in a place. It was using me as the stable element in a chain that could not finish. Driver, signature, witness, release. The body could change. The town could vanish. The clock could fold. As long as someone exact kept delivering, the record could keep pretending chronology still existed. I do not clearly remember leaving Mercer Crossing. I remember highway lights near dawn. I remember calling dispatch and getting no answer. I remember arriving at the Ely yard with an empty cargo bay and 3 completed manifests on the passenger seat, all carbon copies, all signed by me. Officially, I resigned 2 weeks later. Unofficially, I stopped because my odometer kept increasing overnight while the van sat parked in my driveway. The service log said the mileage was clerical carryover. The GPS unit showed no unauthorized use. But some mornings the fuel gauge would be lower and desert dust would be packed into the rear threshold as if the doors had been opened somewhere far from pavement. I still live in Nevada. You learn not to leave a state just because one road misbehaves. But I do not drive south of Ely after midnight, and I never answer unknown numbers after 1 in the morning. Once every few months a dispatch alert still appears on my old tablet, which I never turned back in and should probably destroy. Pickup confirmed. Maintain chain of custody. No coordinates, no body name. Only a route time. 1:12 a.m. If there are places in this country that function like institutions after the buildings are gone, then some roads are not roads at all. They are intake systems stretched across open land. And if you ever sign often enough for one of them, it starts expecting your handwriting. Story 4. Burned into evidence. Most people never think about how much of an unattended death becomes paperwork before it becomes memory. By the time a case reached me in the forensic imaging division, someone had already made the call, secured the scene, and started the chain that would turn a private ending into folders, property sheets, witness canvases, and evidence tags. My part was supposed to be simple. Document exactly what was there, preserve position, relation, lighting, and condition, photograph before movement, photograph after movement, capture identifiers, capture injuries if present, capture the room in a sequence another investigator could read later without ever having stood in it. In summer of '28, Las Vegas Metro was still in the awkward middle ground between film and full digital. We had department digital bodies, but they were not trusted for everything yet. Some scenes still required 35mm backup, especially on cases likely to get dragged into court months later. So I worked both ways. Flash meter, spare batteries, evidence scale, memory cards, film canisters, scene cards, chain labels. The whole kit rode in a hard case that felt heavier on holiday weekends because holiday weekends guaranteed people would die alone in apartments while fireworks popped across the valley. That 4th of July weekend ran on a skeleton crew. Half the department had some version of promised time off. The rest of us covered for each other and pretended we were not tired. Heat sat over the city like a lid. Even after midnight, stucco walls radiated warmth back at you. Neighbors set off illegal fireworks in alleys and cul-de-sacs, which made every call sound urgent until you got there and remembered the difference between celebration and panic. I had been in forensic imaging 6 years by then. Long enough to trust process more than instinct. Long enough to know scenes only felt haunted to civilians because they arrived after silence had already settled in. To me, most scenes felt overlit, procedural, and faintly sad. The camera insulated you. You framed, you metered, you recorded, distance came built in. The first anomaly did not feel like an anomaly at all. It felt like a reflection I had failed to notice on scene. The case was an unattended death in a condo off Flamingo. Male, late 60s, natural causes likely. Found in a recliner facing an old tube television that had been switched off. I shot the room in sequence, both digital and film, recorded ambient placement, then moved on. When I reviewed the digital set in the office at about 3 in the morning, one image showed a face in the dark glass of the television. Not the decedent's face, not mine. A third face. It was faint, positioned over my left shoulder in the reflection, pale enough that at first I thought it was a compression artifact from the flash. But it had features. Brow, nose bridge, half a mouth. It looked like someone standing behind me during exposure. I checked the scene log. Only me, the death investigator, and one patrol officer had been in the room. I knew both men well. The reflected face belonged to neither. I zoomed in until the pixels broke down. The shape remained. I pulled the film back up from the dryer later that morning, expecting the image to clear up one way or the other. On film, the television reflection showed only me in the room. No third face. I wrote the difference off as a digital sensor quirk. Early digital systems loved to invent ghosts in high-contrast scenes. Hot pixels, flash bounce, noise and shadow fields. It bothered me, but not enough to elevate beyond a technical note. Then it happened again. Second case, apartment near Charleston. Apartment. Elderly woman found in bed. Normal room documentation. Window glass at frame right. On digital review, a silhouette stood in the reflected hallway behind the bedroom door. Tall, narrow, indistinct. On film, no silhouette. Third case. Motel bathroom on the edge of town. Decedent on tile. Small mirror over sink. In the digital shot, there was movement between frames where no one had crossed. Not a person exactly. A smudged vertical form positioned where the doorway should have been empty. Patterns matter in forensic work because repetition is how you separate system error from chance. 3 contradictory reflections in unrelated scenes over 2 nights meant I had to take it seriously as a technical issue at minimum. I cleaned sensors, changed batteries, swapped lenses, and checked flash sync with one of the lab techs. No defect. I ran controlled shots in the office bathroom mirror. Clean results. I told myself the problem belonged to certain environments, old televisions, mixed light sources, mirrored surfaces, holiday fatigue. Then the archive began disagreeing with itself. In those years, our workflow required digital upload first, followed by contact sheets and film negative storage for designated cases. I was reviewing the Flamingo condo set with my supervisor, Neil Corbett, when he asked why I had photographed the decedent twice from the same angle. I told him I had not. He pointed to two prints on the table. Same chair, same room, same composition. But in one image, the decedent's face was the man from the case. In the other, the face belonged to the elderly woman from the Charleston bedroom. I laughed at first because the alternative was absurd. I said he must have mixed the piles. He said the case numbers matched. They did. Same evidence barcode, same image sequence identifier. Two different victims occupying the same frame. Film backup showed only the correct man in the chair. Neil's first explanation was database indexing error. My first explanation was that someone in tech services had duplicated a preview by mistake. But when we pulled the raw digital file, the metadata still matched the Flamingo case while the face in the image remained wrong. Not superimposed, not obviously edited. It was as if the photograph had decided the dead man in the chair should carry a different identity, and had updated the visual record to reflect that choice. Neil told me not to overthink it and said we would re-export from the card. The re-export produced a third face. This one belonged to a drowning victim I had photographed the previous spring. That was when the room got very quiet. He sent me home after that, mostly because I had been awake too long and partly, I think, because he did not want to say out loud that our evidence archive had just performed something no technical support call could explain. I slept badly, came back the next evening, and found a note on my desk asking me to review several older image sets with possible background anomalies. Neil had locked them in a side cabinet. He was not in yet. Holiday traffic had delayed him. I opened the cabinet and found 4 old case files spanning almost 7 years. Unattended deaths, all closed, all photographed by different imaging staff. Each file had a sticky tab on one print or another. Window reflection, microwave door reflection, framed picture glass, dark television screen. Always the same issue, a face or figure in the background not documented on scene. At first the faces seemed different, then I realized they were not different enough. They repeated. Not in a clean loop, not one face every time. A small pool of faces cycling through scenes where they did not belong. Some belonged to prior decedents. Some I did not recognize. One of them, I would later learn, belonged to a former department photographer who had taken medical retirement after a breakdown nobody discussed directly. That was the first time I saw his name. Calvin Dorr. His file was tucked beneath the older evidence boxes in an archive room that smelled like dust, cardboard, and exhausted air conditioning. Calvin had worked imaging before me, back when film was everything and digital was used mostly for quick reference. According to the personnel note, he complained that contact sheets and negatives were cross-seeding identity markers between unrelated death scenes. That exact phrase. He submitted a written recommendation to separate scene archive by decedent status rather than by calendar sequence. Recommendation denied. A month later, he took leave. 2 months later, he was gone from the roster. No termination memo, no retirement packet, just absence. I spent the rest of the weekend reviewing old evidence storage boxes and making myself progressively less comfortable. Some sleeves held missing negatives where the index said they should exist. Some cases had duplicate print sets with slightly altered backgrounds. In one box, I found 2 contact sheets from a closed case in North Las Vegas. Same roll number, same room, same sequence. But the final exposure, the close shot of the victim's face, differed between sheets. One showed the correct decedent. The other showed Calvin Dorr, not as a reflection, as the body on the floor. I brought that one to Neil. He took longer than I expected to look surprised. Then he asked where I found it, which was not the reaction I wanted from a supervisor. I told him Archive Box 9. He rubbed his mouth with the side of his hand and said he had hoped those sets had been purged during conversion. Purged from what? I asked. He did not answer directly. He said there had been storage contamination years ago when the department tried integrating negative scans with the new digital asset manager. Some files linked wrong, some names attached wrong. A consultant was brought in. The problem was fixed. I held up the contact sheet with Calvin on the floor. Then what is this? Neil looked at it, then looked at me, and for the first time in my career I saw someone in forensics decide that honesty would cause more damage than evasion. He said Calvin believed the archive preferred closed loops. Once a face entered the system often enough, especially under unattended death conditions, it became easier for later images to resolve uncertainty by borrowing from existing dead. Background reflections were the early stage. Direct replacement was later. Neil said Calvin also believed the process targeted photographers because we stood behind the camera often enough to remain adjacent to the record without entering it fully. I asked if Neil believed any of that. He said he believed the department had lost track of which negatives were original. That answer should have reassured me. Instead, it felt like the kind of sentence people use when they want an impossible thing to stay administrative. By Monday, I started seeing the faces at scenes before review. Not clearly. Just the sensation that a television screen in the room was showing more light than it should, or that a dark microwave door reflected a shoulder no one in the apartment wore. Once, in a condo bathroom near Summerlin, I lowered the camera after a flash and thought I saw a man standing behind the shower curtain reflected in the mirror. When the patrol officer pulled it aside, there was nothing there but tile and the weak smell of chlorine cleaner. That should have been the point where I requested leave. Instead, I became more procedural, more exact. I announced exposures aloud. I shot mirrors from 2 angles. I marked room occupancy every time I changed position. I trusted film over digital, and then, when film began showing the same anomalies digital had shown earlier, I stopped trusting the difference between them too. One night around 2:30 in the morning, I developed a roll from an apartment death on Boulder Highway and watched the image come up in the chemical tray. That process is slow enough to feel intimate. Shadows rise first, then edges, then the mid-tones settle. In the second frame, the decedent lay half-turned beside the bed exactly as documented on scene. In the glass of a framed landscape print over the dresser, a face began to appear. Mine. Not my current face exactly, a little gaunter. Eyes darker in the sockets, mouth slack in the way the dead lose intention. But mine enough that I dropped the tray tongs and splashed developer across my sleeve. I checked the scene notes. I had been alone on that angle except for the decedent and the investigator in the hall. No reflective position should have captured me there, yet the print insisted I had stood inside the room in 2 places at once, one alive behind the lens and one dead inside the glass. I stopped sleeping much after that. I started dreaming in flash intervals. White burst, dark room, white burst. Same room with one person moved, same room with the body replaced, same room empty but still tagged. Then a call came in from evidence storage. They had found an unlabeled banker's box during holiday cleanout. It had been shelved behind old chemistry supplies in the imaging annex and did not appear on inventory. Since it contained negatives and contact sheets they wanted me to review. The box held work from Calvin Dorr, not official files. Private duplicates, scene copies he should not have retained. Dozens of them spanning at least a year. Each sleeve carried handwritten notes in the margin. Reflection repeats. Digital agrees tonight. Negative changed after storage. Face returned in frame 14. Under one stack sat a personal memo folded into quarters. I still know parts of it by heart. He wrote that the archive did not keep photographs, it kept positions. Once enough deaths shared the same angles, Same room geometries, same unattended conditions. The system began layering identities to reduce uncertainty. The dead were easier to store if they resembled the dead already cataloged. He believed photographers accelerated the process because we supplied continuity. Same eye level, same lens habits, same room sequence. We taught the archive how to see. At the bottom of the memo, he had listed names. 4 photographers, himself included. Beside 2 names, he had written replacement visible. Beside mine, though I had not yet joined the division during his tenure, he had written next stable witness. That should have been impossible. I checked the date twice. The memo had been written 2 years before I was hired. There are moments when fear becomes simpler than confusion. I had one of those then. I took the box, locked myself in the review room, and started comparing Calvin's private duplicates to official archive sets. In case after case, his copies preserved details that the official images later lost. Original victim face in one, replaced face in archive, empty hallway in one, figure in official print, a pattern of substitution, not random corruption, and buried in a summer case from years before my employment. I found the photograph that finally broke whatever patience I had left. It was an unattended death in a tract home kitchen. Old scene, cheap linoleum, flash burn off a chrome toaster. In the black window over the sink stood a reflected figure holding a camera. Me, not someone like me. Me in department polo, evidence lanyard, and the scar at my chin from a bicycle accident in middle school. I had not worked for Metro then. I had not even lived in Las Vegas. But there I was in the archive, already placed in the background of a death scene years before I arrived, standing exactly where a forensic photographer would stand. Neil found me with the box open and prints all over the table. He did not act surprised anymore, just tired. He said Calvin had shown him something similar once. I asked why nobody shut the system down if they had seen this happen. He said because departments do not shut down evidence systems over things they cannot explain. They quarantine. They relabel. They hope conversion wipes the problem clean. Did it? I asked. He looked at the wall of archive cabinets and did not answer. The climax, if that is what you want to call it, happened on July 5th in the digital transfer room. I was rescanning older negatives slated for long-term migration. One strip from the Flamingo condo passed under the scanner light and displayed clean. Correct victim. Correct room. I loaded the matching frame from the department digital archive beside it for comparison. The face in the chair was mine, not approximate, not reflected. My face attached to the decedent in full frontal scene documentation, eyes half open toward the dark television. The metadata still named the original victim. The visual record no longer agreed. I pulled the film negative and held it to the light. Even there, physically present in emulsion, the features had started to soften away from the original toward me. At the same moment, the room monitor flickered and began cycling thumbnail previews from unrelated, unattended death cases. In every reflection surface, every black television, every darkened window, every microwave door and bathroom mirror, the background figure had become consistent. Me again, standing behind the camera, standing on the far side of the room, lying in the chair, on the floor, in the bed. A complete replacement chain unfolding across years of archived evidence, as if the system had finally settled on a face capable of holding multiple positions at once. Neil reached past me and killed the monitor power. It came back on by itself. The thumbnails remained. He said very quietly, "Do not let them reprocess the negatives." I asked who they were, and he gave me the only honest answer he had left. "The archive," he said. "I took the private box home that night, which was illegal and which I do not regret." 2 days later, evidence reported the box had never existed. No annex cleanout log, no unlabeled materials. Neil transferred to another unit before I could confront him again. When I requested copies of the Flamingo files, the system showed ordinary images with no anomalies. The prints in my apartment still did. That was 18 years ago. I left forensic imaging not long after. I never fully trusted cameras again, not even for family gatherings. If a television is dark in the room, I angle myself away from it. If a window reflects at night, I do not look for long. I have learned that archives do not need to be haunted in any spiritual sense to be dangerous. They only need enough repetition, enough authority, and enough people willing to treat contradiction like a filing issue. Every now and then, especially in summer, I open the box Calvin left behind. The prints continue changing slowly, but not at random. More of the dead wear my face now than his. And in the newest changes, something worse has started happening. In the background reflections, behind the body and behind the photographer I used to be, there is sometimes another figure waiting in the room. Not yet clear enough to identify. Just a shape where the next witness will stand. That may be what all evidence becomes if you preserve it long enough without understanding what it is preserving. Not facts, not people, positions. And once a system learns where to place you, it does not easily give that space back.